As always, we are brought to you by Salida Promotions, who is building one of the best boxing YouTube channels on the planet. Tonight, I am actually really privileged to have a boxing executive on the show with us. So allow me to introduce the president of Warriors Boxing, Leon Margules. Leon, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. And my tape library is part of Salida's YouTube channel anyway.
I did know that.
Yeah.
So Leon, thank you again for carving out some time with us this evening. First question is, I know that you're out in Florida, in Fort Lauderdale. How are you doing? How's your family doing?
We're being careful. We're doing okay. We're doing fine. My wife works at Cleveland Clinic. She's an RN, so we're taking the proper precautions and social distancing and wearing masks and not going out too much socially. We're fine. I go to my office every day, but I know everybody there.
Thank you. It's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting how.
What?
How about a month and a half ago, the epicenter was New York and New Jersey, and then it moved to Florida.
Yeah, I'm originally.
All right.
I grew up in New Jersey, and I was born in New York and grew up in New Jersey. So
okay.
Yeah.
Well, I want to get more into your background in a moment, but before we do, because you are a subject matter expert and you are a trusted advisor to many really important figures in boxing, I thought I'd ask you, when you look at the landscape of the sport and the business aspect, you look at COVID-19, what it's doing, to the economy, what it's having an effect on in sports in general. What do you think the long-lasting impact of the virus will be on the sport?
Long-lasting, I think the sport will be okay. Short-lasting, it's going to hurt a lot of people, unfortunately. Young fighters that can't get work, can't develop properly. Older fighters that might be on the downside, that this might have been their last good year. And, of course, fighters in their prime that lose a good portion of their prime year. So it's bad for it's bad for every sport. It's bad for everybody. It's bad for baseball, football. It's bad for everything. But like everything else, they'll solve it. There'll be a vaccine. And a year from now, we'll be in a packed house somewhere, and it'll be great again.
Yeah, I mean, from your mouth, right? From your mouth, a packed house would be great. Can't even envision that right now. And it makes me think, do you think that this could be the end of the club show as we know it? If there's not a TV network that's broadcasting it and we can't sell tickets, and will young fighters not get the opportunity to perform?
Well, first of all, I think there'll always be club shows. But I don't look at television and club shows the same way. Club shows are completely dark shows. They're fighters fighting 4s and 6s, and they're getting their feet wet, and they're learning their way around the ring. And then you have the small regional cable networks. Unfortunately, don't have enough of that. We miss first it was USA Tuesday night fights, and then Friday night fights. And the sport's really polarized now. Really, you have three big players controlling the three main industry, money streams, and so it's difficult for a smaller, medium-sized promoter. I think you'll see people that are not in the business anymore, but there'll always be new people. There'll always be new ideas and changes, and boxing has ebbs and flows, and there'll be a new network, and there'll be a network that you look. I would have never thought I'd be talking to you tonight and telling you we don't box on HBO anymore, because that was the heart and soul of boxing for most of the years I've been in the industry.
That's true, and you've done some great shows on HBO, some really memorable fights.
ESPN. I started on Tuesday Night Fights, and I remember Brad Jacobs from Top Rank used to be the guy that bought the shows on Tuesday Night Fights.
Yeah. So when you look at what could be kind of down the line, one thing I thought of from a fighter's perspective is maybe a fighter won't be as choosy with their opponent, because look at the folks that had fights lined up in March, April, May. That's all gone, and they're not even rescheduled. Do you think maybe the fighters that maybe are not at the top, but the ones that are at the medium range, will just take any fight that's offered to them now?
I hope so. But what I'm seeing is fights that I'd like to be more competitive. For example, I've been watching Bob Arum's show, and I know he's trying, but I believe that the fights could be more competitive.
Yeah,
and a lot of that's budget. I mean, I even know the numbers I'm hearing from the Matchroom people, the numbers I'm hearing from the PBC people. With the budgets they have, it's going to be tough to match hard, because there's a battle for less dollars. And the gate was important to the big fights, as you know, because the gates are winning millions of dollars. So I don't know. It'll be difficult. It's tough to keep the top guys busy, not have the budget to bring in the top opponents, and force people to fight for less money in a tougher fight than they're used to. So I think that's also a learning curve. And I think people that are willing to fight the toughest for the most reasonable amount of money will get to work. For the time being, anyway.
You've got a pretty sizable promotion stable. You have a very big business. What adjustments have you made in light of COVID-19?
Well, I haven't signed any new fighters in the last 3 or 4 months, because when fighters have approached me about working with them, I said, listen, I don't know what I can do with you right now. I don't know. The fighter's 4-0, 5-0, 6-0. What do I do? Where do I put them? And you got, and even the big shots in the business are doing less fights per show. So there's not even enough rooms on the undercard. You know, we were doing shows last year at the Armory. One of our home bases is the Armory in Minneapolis, and we do a bunch of shows there, PPC shows there. And there would be 12, 13 fights on a night. So a lot of these guys would get work. Now, we're talking about coming back in studios without fans. What, there's 4 or 5 fights, 6 fights? There's no reason to have an undercard. The reason for the undercard was the fans, right? Now everything's television, right? So you don't need a long undercard because you got nobody to watch it.
Yeah, and you know,
Plus,
the interesting thing
you bring in, plus the more people you bring in, the more people you have to test, the more officials you need, and it's really the bubbles that are being created by the promoters now for television are very difficult, technically challenging.
Yeah, and so you mentioned some of the big guys that are controlling, you know, the networks. If this goes past the beginning of 2021, if maybe there isn't a vaccine that we trust that's available, do you think some of the smaller or mid-range promoters might be out of business?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I don't know who's like Gary Shaw's gone. Who's left? I mean, who's left? I mean, myself, DeBella. I mean, DeBella will hang in there. I'll hang in there. I don't know who are the mid-range promoters. I mean, I don't know. You know, Tudo, Zabala, All-Star, they're always going to have their niche with Telemundo. And there's always going to be local club promoters that, you know, that are managers building their fighters to turn them over to big promoters. So I don't know. I'm certainly hoping that there's more network deals and things down the pike, because I've seen so many ups and downs in this sport in the 30 years I've been in it. Yeah.
Let's take a break from COVID-19. Let's talk about you and your beginning. So you're an accomplished attorney in South Florida. Well, how did you get into this crazy business of boxing?
It's an interesting story. In fact, I've been practicing law. March 20th, I was practicing law 40 years, okay, in the state of Florida. But anyway, back in 1991, there was first Cuban athlete defected from Cuba, Jorge Luis Gonzalez, big 6'7" heavyweight. And he signed with 2 promoters. He signed with Louis DeCubas, Sr., who's still my partner in Warriors, and he signed with Tudo Zabala. And they were in litigation in Florida. And there was a law firm in Nevada by the name of Goodman and Chesnoff. I don't know, I'm sure you know who Oscar Goodman is, former mayor of Las Vegas. And David Chesnoff was a friend of my partner's. And there was a conflict because the judge in Miami said you can't have Gonzalez and DeCubas represented by the same lawyer. And they referred Louis to me, and I became Gonzalez's lawyer. And that's how I got into the industry. And Louis Gonzalez, of course, we were successful. Gonzalez stayed with Louis DeCubas. And then with friends of mine that I know from law school and are in the entertainment business, we formed a company with all the Cubans called Team Freedom Promotions, which I formed in 1995. And I got my first promotional license as president of Team Freedom Promotions in Florida, 1995.
What was it about the boxing bug that hooked you to make you stay in through all the ebbs and flows and the ups and downs?
I've been trying cases for 20 years. You know, actually not even 20 years at that time. At first, boxing was a sideline. You know, I would tell you, if you talk to me in the mid in the mid 90s, toward the late 90s, I was 80% lawyer and 20%, boxing promoter. Today, I'm probably 60% boxing promoter and 40% lawyer. I still practice. My son is a lawyer and he's my partner, my law partner. So, but, it was fun. It's fun. I mean, I was always a fan. I mean, I used to go to closed circuit fights with Leonard, and Hearns, Duran, and all those guys. And what's funny is that later on, Duran became my client, and Sugar Ray Leonard became my client. I represented Sugar Ray Leonard boxing, and so it was an interesting experience. So guys that I used to be fans of became my clients and my partners. And Louis and I are still partners now, 29 years later.
That's an amazing story. So I know you act as counsel for a lot of folks, right? I know you've worked on behalf of Lou DiBella. So is there every time where it's a conflict of interest for you to be, counsel or advisor for a promoter, but you're also maybe promoting a fighter maybe against one of their fighters?
All the time. But they're not like their conflicts that aren't fully disclosed. They're business deals, right? So you can say I'm waiving the conflict because I don't want to educate another lawyer, and people that know me, I think my reputation, I've worked very hard to play it down the middle. I don't think I've ever, a lot of people hire me to be escrow agents. I worked recently for the World Boxing Super Series. I was their counsel. So, and I had 4 or 5 fighters competing in the tournament. So, and DiBella put guys against my guys. And I think people know that I try to treat everybody as a professional. And I'm not one of the egocentric guys in the industry. I don't have to be on television. I don't have to have my picture taken.
Maybe that adds to your longevity.
Yeah, it's about the fighter, not me.
Absolutely.
I enjoy it. I enjoy the art of the deal. I enjoy the art of negotiations. I've met a lot of fine people. I'm sure I could tell you people that don't have great reputations that I adore and they're dear friends of mine. And and it's so funny how many people that were adversaries for many years became either clients or hired me as an expert witness, or later on said, well, now that Samson Lukovic will tell you the story that I sued him when I met him. He had Jorge Barrios was supposed to fight Acelina Freitas for the title, but Casimir was blocking, and I sued the WBO, and I sued Samson, I sued Barrios, I sued everybody, and as a result, they had to pay me a sizable step-aside fee, and give me the next fight, and I remember Samson handing me a check and saying, now that this case is over, I want to retain you as my lawyer. And I've been his lawyer ever since.
That's amazing. Well, you also paved the way for a great fight, because the Barrios Popo Freitas fight was a great fight, and Casamayor was so great fights, and all kind of really good down in boxing lore. So tell me a little bit about Joel Casamayor. Give me like a Casamayor story from when you started working with him, or something the fans wouldn't know.
That's a good. I don't know what the fans know or don't know, so that's a different story. But Jorge Casamayor and Ramon Garbe defected right before the '96 games, and there was a legal dispute between Top Rank and Main Events, who we went with Main Events as co-promoters with Main Events, and we ended up resolving it. And I remember announcing the signing of Garbe and Casamayor right in Atlanta, across from the Olympic venue in 1996, after they had just defected from. They defected right before the games, and they came across the border in Yuma. They were in Mexico with the Cuban team. So I don't know if people knew that. Joel was one of the great fighters I've ever worked with. He never had a bad night. He never had it easy. He fought everybody. He fought Corrales 3 times. He fought everybody, and was a great. I wish he was a little younger when he got here, because I think he was 26 already when he defected. But really one of the great fighters in his prime. I don't think there was many better lightweights.
Yeah. So sticking with around that time, maybe looking at like the late '90s or early 2000s, I read a crazy story that happened. If you can give me maybe some background. So you're promoting a pretty big fight in maybe Hollywood, Florida, or Fort Lauderdale, Florida, where the main event was supposed to be Ray Mercer. And a week before the fight, he just says, "Yeah, I'm going to retire," and you accept the retirement, and that's the end of that. And then you find out he's actually going to go to Japan and be a kickboxer. So you sued him.
You missed the part where I got an injunction.
Yes.
He was held in contempt of court for fighting. We served the injunction on him in his hotel room in Japan, and he disobeyed the judge. Ultimately, had to pay a fine. But a Florida judge entered an injunction on behalf. And by the way, at that time, I was not working for Warriors Boxing. You know, Seminole Warriors Boxing is a company that was started by the tribe. I went to work for the tribe, and then I bought the company from them when they decided to get out of the promotional business. But in those days, I was their lawyer. I was Seminole Warriors Boxing's lawyer, and I sued Ray Mercer on their behalf. Wasn't on my own. I wasn't involved from anything other than the legal side.
Got it. Interesting. Okay. So when I think about other, wacky things that can happen to a boxing promoter, I think back when I know you were promoting some shows for Heyman. You were promoting a show in Minnesota 2 years ago.
I wrote that down because I knew it was going to come up. It was August 24th of 18.
That's okay. Right. And it was a heavyweight FA
against Curtis Harper.
Curtis Harper, exactly.
I actually thought it was going to be a pretty good fight.
Well, what the heck happened? So look, before you go, I want to set the stage, right? So you got this heavyweight prospect trained by Ronnie Shields, and then you got Curtis Harper, right? So you flew him to town. So
tough guy, by the way, and gave the Mexican heavyweight Arreola, gave Chris Arreola a tremendous fight.
He's a good fighter, but I watched the pre-fight introduction. And he's actually smiling and mugging for the camera, like he's smiling, and then
took off his gloves. Took off his shirts.
No, but he touched gloves with a Java, and he listened to the pre-fight instructions, and then just turned around and left. What the heck happened?
I don't know. I've heard all. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I've heard all kinds of stories. I don't know. It was so funny because I was sitting in the front row, and I'm watching the fight, and I'm watching this unfold, and Lou DiBella is texting me, so he's reacting live. He's reacting to a Jabba, and he says Curtis takes off his shirt, made a comment about the guy's anatomy. I mean, I wouldn't repeat it, in this kind of a setting, but literally hysterical, And then he goes, "What?" And the live, I got his, texting, and I'm watching it live, and of course nobody knew what to do. He weighed in, he came in. I don't know. Of course the Jabba said, "Well, I took off my shirt, I intimidated him," but I don't know. Maybe I don't know. I really don't. Then he said, because the bell rang, he thought he was going to get paid. They came chasing me. He wants his check. I said, "Tell him to go home. Tell him he's lucky I'm going to let him stay in a hotel overnight and not kick him out tonight and tell him to leave."
So he didn't get paid for the fight. He didn't get
of course not. He didn't fight. And by the way, it was on national television. It wasn't. It was a televised fight. It was, it was so funny because everybody was reacting, and some people were saying that's terrible for the sport and terrible for television, and Fox is going to be upset, and PBC is going to be upset, and all this stuff. And I said, somebody look at the rating points, because when it happened, everybody's, and all of a sudden, there was a little bump in the ratings because everybody tuning in after that. So who knows?
Unforgettable.
Yeah.
Yeah. So was that one of the craziest things that ever happened to you as a promoter promoting a fight?
Absolutely. Just when you thought you saw it all. I mean, I've had fights fall out in the dressing room, and I've had guys get hurt warming up, but I've never, and I haven't met anybody else that ever saw that. Or if they had, it was on an undercard somewhere. I don't think that's ever happened on national TV. I had a fighter once have a nervous breakdown. I'm not going to even mention the fighter's name because I'm not going to embarrass him. Okay? He was an undefeated fighter. He was winning every single round of the fight. He had never gone a distance. He had like 17, 18 straight knockouts. He was winning it was in Puerto Rico. He was winning every single round of the fight against a guy never been stopped. And the guy was survival mode, and he was trying to knock his head off. And between the 7th and 8th round, I guess he hit a wall. And what happened is he took off all his clothes, except for his cup, and ran out of the ring and out of the dressing room. And of course, he lost by disqualification. He just he couldn't have lost the fight other than any other way.
Wow, that's incredible.
Because it's the game's so mental. It's such a mental game. People do things that differently based on look what everybody's talking now about Jarrell Miller. Okay, and you heard Eddie. Was it Eddie Eddie Hearn who talked about maybe he's so dependent on this stuff he doesn't trust his ability to fight without it. He's got a mental problem. So that's another story.
Well, since you brought up Jarrell Miller, oftentimes we think of three things that really hurt the sport, right? So performance enhancing drugs hurt the sport. Terrible decisions hurt the sport, and then the best don't fight the best. That hurts the sport. Of the three, which one is the most detrimental to the sport?
Definitely performance enhancing drugs. So the best don't fight the best are business decisions and political decisions. And sometimes the best do fight the best. And when they do, it's great. And sometimes the best aren't fighting the best, but it turns out to be a great fight because somebody was overlooked. So, okay, so that's that one. As far as bad decisions, I respect judges tremendously. And as a promoter and as someone who at least thinks about the sport on maybe a high level, there's a lot of times where the judges see the same fight differently. And a lot of it is angles. Boxing is angles, right? So you have three judges on three different sides of the ring, right? And then the fourth, and then you have television and their commentator and what they think, right? On the fourth, and that's the fourth side of the ring, right? They don't have a judge on that side of the ring, right? So you're basically assuming that television is judging the fight with the three judges. They're watching four different fights. Okay, and I have been involved in some controversial decisions where I've talked to people, and a lot of times the people sitting on the same side of the ring as that particular judge saw it the way that judge saw it, as opposed to the judge and the fans on the other side of the ring. And I think if a study was done, you'd find a lot more of that, a lot more consistency based on where they were watching the fight from. I'm not saying there's not bad decisions, but I think judging's hard, and I think most judges do the best they can. Yeah. And then some judges like a puncher, some like a boxer. I could tell stories where there were three judges, and I told a partner, a friend, I said, look, this judge is going to score it for this guy, and that judge is going to score it for that guy, and then the third judge was Steve Weisfeld, who I think is the best in the world, and I said, and Steve's going to decide the fight. And sure enough, it happened. And how did you know that? Because I know the styles of the fighters, and I know what the judges tend to favor.
Yeah. What was one of the most controversial decisions that you were a part of?
Controversial decisions that I was a part of. Wow, that's hard. That's hard. When you say controversial, that's also a different definition. I remember I did a fight for the world title, or it was an eliminator at the Hard Rock when I was working for the Seminole tribe. And it was Juan Urango against Raphael, forgot his last name, but he was from Australia. A true story. And it was a close fight, competitive fight. And Urango won a unanimous decision. And Teddy Atlas lambasted the fight and called it hometown judging. Okay? One judge had it 15-13. One judge had it 16-12. And the third judge had it 18-10. Okay? Now I'll tell you the story, the inside story, which Teddy didn't tell anybody on television tonight. The two judges that had it 16-12 and 15-13, they were the Florida judges. The judge from Australia, the other guy's hometown, had it 18-10. Sometimes nuances like that people don't pick up on. Another controversial fight, I was promoting Glenn Johnson, and we were fighting Clinton Woods in the third fight. Okay? And the three judges were a friend of Glenn's from Florida, Mickey Bays, a gentleman from Puerto Rico, and Mickey Van from England. Okay? And Glenn lost a split decision in that fight, in the third Clinton Wood fight. And the guy that gave the decision is the guy he has lunch with every week, the judge from Florida.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
That he was so happy when he got appointed, and that was the judge that went again. The English judge went for Glenn, did not for the English fighter, Clinton Woods. The Puerto Rican judge went for Clinton, and the judge from Florida went for Clinton.
You know, Leon, I'm so glad that you told me those two stories, because it really brings to the forefront that there are some good decisions out there that are controversial and close. And to your point, controversial can mean different things. If we don't agree with it, it's controversial. But there are controversial decisions that actually are the right decisions. So I'm glad you brought those up. We got a few minutes left, and I wanted to touch on something you mentioned earlier. So you've worked with the World Boxing Super Series, which I thought was great for the sport. I thought it had some competitive matchups. It just really put some of the really best versus the best. Fights were great. What I wanted to ask you particularly is that it seems that you have been in the cruiserweight business for a while, and the cruiserweight business is almost like the forgotten division. And then the Super Series brought that to the forefront and showed, look at these competitive cruiserweight fights. Yeah, some of these guys are heavyweights. Usyk and Gasayev wants to be a heavyweight. But in reality, people didn't pay attention to that division. Tell me a little bit about the World Boxing Super Series and the cruiserweight division.
So I didn't end up in the cruiserweight division because I was looking to end up in the cruiserweight division, but a lot of the top cruiserweights were attracted to me. And one of the reasons was because in 2006, I became partners with Andrew Wasilewski from Poland. And he's the biggest promoter in Knockout Poland is the name of his company, and he's the biggest promoter in Poland. And he asked me to help him as a U.S. promoter. We worked together on fighters and kept bringing me cruiserweights. And so I ended up with two cruiserweight champions, and with Andrew and I were partners. One was Krzysztof Wlodarczyk, and he had a 5-year run as, WBC champion. And the other was Krzysztof Głowacki, who had some pretty good fights and actually lost to Usyk, gave up the title to Usyk. So I had that opportunity. And then, of course, because of my partnership with Louis, we got Yanir Dordikos. Okay? And then, of course, because, and it's an interesting story, because of being a Jewish person and the people that have Gassiev, Orthodox Jews, and Aram wasn't interested in the cruiserweight division, I ended up with Gassiev falling on my lap. So now I have all these top cruiserweights, right? And I don't know what to do with them, okay? So other than fight them in Europe, and we made some fights. And Richard Schaefer and Callie Sauerland comes over and announces World Boxing Super Series. I called him up. So what weight classes are you going to use? You should use cruiserweights. They said, why? I said, because it's really the only weight division based on your budget that you'll be able to get all 4 belts. And they said, no, we're going to do these other 2 weight. I said, super middleweight, which they ended up doing. I think they also were going to try to do super welterweight. And it didn't work out. They couldn't get the top fighters in super welterweight division. And they came back at me. And they said, you think you can get all 4 world champions if we put in the cruiserweight division? I said, I know I can. He said, how do you know you can? Well, one champion is Dordikos. I have him. Right? One champion is Wlodarczyk and Gassiev have to fight for the vacant title. So we got him, right? I spoke to the people with Breedis, and they said would come in. And I spoke to Egas with Usyk, and he said he would come in. So I'm delivering 2 because I'm delivering both ends of an eliminator and a champion, right? And I've got oral commitments from the other two because I was thinking about a cruiserweight tournament outside of the World Boxing Super Series. I was going to try to figure out how to do it, and it's just perfect storm, and that's how I got involved. And then Chris Meyer, who ran Saraland for 20-something years and was head boxing advisor, and of course Richard Schaefer came to me and said, "Look, you're a perfect consultation. You're a perfect consulting guy for us because you can bring fighters and help us sign fighters. And two, we don't need to hire outside counsel. You can do our legal work. You can develop the contracts with us." So we made a deal. So it was a perfect storm.
Leon, as we wrap up, I just want to tell you, listening to you talk about the behind the scenes and the art of the deal, it's actually no wonder how you got hooked and hypnotized on boxing from being an attorney. I want to thank you, first of all, for your time and your insight and the wonderful stories. I'd love to have you back again.
Listen, anytime I can sit and talk about boxing with people that are interested and excited about the sport, what better thing to do?
Great. Leon, we wish you and your family all the best. Stay safe down there in Florida. Have a good evening, and we'll see you at the fights.
Everybody wear masks when they can.
Absolutely. So before we wrap up, that was Leon Margules, president of Warriors Boxing. I urge everyone to look at Salida Promotions YouTube channel. The library continues to grow. We have the Lennox Lewis library coming in. We also most recently added the Floyd Mayweather Jr. Angel Manfredi fight, which is a really, really cool fight. And a quick fun fact about that fight. You may have seen that fight and said, well, I don't really need to go back and watch that fight. But the introductions are really interesting because escorting Angel Manfredi into the ring is none other than a very young Kid Rock. And it was just really interesting.
Was that the fight at Miccosukee?
Yes.
Was that in a doubleheader with Rockman and Tua?
Yes, with Rockman and Tua. Yep.
I put that
fight, good memory. It was down in Florida. Yep. Yes, so I urge everyone to look at that fight. And also most recently added to the Salida Promotions YouTube channel is another great fight, a name from the past. Jeff Left Hook Lacey against Donald Wiggins. Really great fight, action-packed fight from England, actually. So everyone check it out, and we'll see everyone next week. I wish everyone a great night. Thanks again, Leon.
Thank you so much, buddy.